carnivore diet is exploding in popularity. One popular carnivore doctor just passed 3 million YouTube subscribers. The Google searches on carnivore are soaring. Many people are having their lives transformed. But here's the big question. Can this last? Is carnivore something you can do for the rest of your life? Is it just a temporary fix to lose some weight and to feel better, restore metabolism? Or is it a lifelong way of eating? Most people say that it's impossible to stick to carnivore for the long term. It's just too hard and too limiting. That's what people say. And they might be right. For many, many people, sticking to this very simple, but yet boring, difficult way of eating, different from what the culture constantly teaches, is incredibly hard. And very few people have stayed carnivore for the long term. But there is one carnivore who was committed to it and consistent with it for 50 years. And he's an extraordinary example. And it's someone you probably haven't heard of unless you've been around the carnivore community for a while. Someone you haven't heard of, but somebody who influence you have probably felt. His name was Owsley Stanley III, known as the Bear. Now, he was an extraordinary scientist, musician, engineer. And his claim to fame is that he was the sound man for the Grateful Dead in its primary period. He also did several illegal things, which are not appropriate to talk about on this channel, but if you want to know more, look him up. As a result of his illegal activities, he amassed a good amount of money early in his life, and he actually funded the Grateful Dead in the mid-1960s when they had no money, no name recognition. He set them up at a house, and he stocked that house with meat. There's writings from the Bear's biographer about how the Grateful Dead were essentially carnivores in their early years because the only food that the Bear would allow into their rental home was meat. And perhaps that's why they could jam for so long. They had that energy. But be that as it may, the Bear was such an extraordinary figure. And many of his writings you can still find on zerocarbzen.com. There's a collection of everything that Bear wrote about carnivore. And it's extensive, it's insightful, it's powerful. I review it frequently because I learn something new every time I read it. But I want to highlight for you some of his most important teachings because I think they can give you some guidance and inspiration wherever you are, even if you're just starting carnivore or if it's something that you've been doing for a while. As I said, I love to go back and review his writings. And perhaps the most powerful thing that he taught was the ability, the encouragement, the guidance to overcoming cultural conditioning. Our way of eating and our view of food is shaped by our culture, and our culture influences us and shapes us in our early years. And we were probably taught when we were growing up to eat fruits and vegetables and that they're really good for you and that we should eat more of them even if they don't taste good. You give them a vegetable, they spit it out right away. But over time, you give the baby more and more vegetables, give the baby more and more sugars, they become acclimated to that. And that becomes their way of eating, especially when the message over and over again is eat your broccoli, eat your vegetables. So we are conditioned within our culture to believe that certain foods are good for us and certain foods are not so good for us. And it is extremely hard to break cultural conditioning. The Bear said it's like trying to perform brain surgery on yourself. Most of us fail most of the time at overcoming cultural conditioning. That's why 95% of diets fail. That's why it's very hard to give up addictions. So the Bear was very aware of how powerful cultural conditioning is. And that if you want to succeed as a carnivore, you have to overcome that cultural conditioning. Even a health crisis doesn't guarantee we're going to have the willpower to stay with it. It takes much more than that. So what does it take? How do we break cultural conditioning? And by the way, this guidance is useful for much more than just carnivore and just a way of eating. Figuring out our own path in life, our own ability to resist the siren songs, the temptations of culture is an extraordinarily important skill if we want to find meaning and purpose happiness in life. So this is something that's about more than carnivore. So the first thing is to realize how good it is for you. So this can only come through experience. So when you embrace carnivore, when you give it a try, and by the way, when you give anything a try, any new way of eating, any new way of life, any new job, any new faith perspective, you have to give it time and it has to feel good. Emotions are often more powerful than reason. How we feel is more important than how we think, often, in terms of creating change. And carnivore works there. Many people, not everybody, but many people feel the benefits of it after just a few weeks. I remember thinking, my God, I have so much more energy. I got to go and lift weights. I love music. I love playing music that I hadn't played in a long time. Came back. I started writing more prodigiously. I was writing 500 words a day. Suddenly I was writing 1,000 words a day in less time. So it felt good. And that itself was a powerful motivation, even though it's hard to stick to when the benefits that makes it easier to stick to. A second technique for overcoming cultural conditioning is constant reinforcement. We need to keep giving ourselves a message that what we're doing is right. That's one of the reasons I create YouTube videos, to provide that encouragement for people that are on this path. That's why I constantly watch YouTube videos and read articles from great teachers like Dante Ferrigno, who I just did an interview with today, and Dr. Barry and Dr. Chafee, and you probably know many of them, and they'll be on this channel as well. They constantly reinforce that message. And we need that reinforcement because the larger culture is giving us something else. Kind of like there's an old Jewish story that says, why do I have to wash myself every day? I wash myself, aren't I clean? No. Yes, you wash yourself and then you get dirty and you need to constantly stay clean. You need to constantly get back into that state, that state of purity in terms of religion and hygiene. And the same thing is true of our mindset. We have to constantly get back into that mindset of doing what we know is right, because often hearing the opposite message around us. Unless you want to be a hermit and isolate yourself from society, and there are people that do that, but that's not what I want to do, and I doubt that's what you want to do. We want to live in this world, participate in the beauty, the friendships, the community of this world, but also protect our health, protect our energy, and do what's right. So we need constant reinforcement to do that. There's just a lot of little tricks and tips too. I have my watch, and I have messages on my watch reminding me to remain consistent, not just in my diet, not just in what I eat, but in how I'm thinking, my mindset, my emotions, my feelings, my perspective. But the ones that are carnivore related, I have one that says, eat meat, shut up, and be happy. That's a great one. And another one says, if you're not hungry for steak, you're not hungry. So these are just little reminders and little, almost bring a little joy, bring a little spark, make me feel good and feel happy in this way of eating. And it works. And the bear talks frequently about that. It's interesting to look at his life history, how he got into carnivore. He read a book by Vilhjalmur Stefansson, is how it's pronounced, who was an explorer who spent a year with the Eskimos. And Stefansson followed their diet and saw how healthy they were and felt incredibly healthy himself. And Stefansson was a wonderful writer, very charismatic, great explorer. And after reading his work, the bear embraced it. He was, I think he was 23 when he first started, and he was a very active person. And suddenly he was able to be more active. Eventually, after he created the modern sound system, the wall of sound that was used by the Grateful Dead and then was popularized at all major concert venues. He did that for several years. And then he moved to Australia and lived on a farm and wrote and grew, raised animals, and then continued to write about carnivore. But he remained true to it for more than 50 years, and he looked great. You look at pictures of him in his 70s, and he could pass for being in his 50s, if not younger. He died in a car accident, which was tragic. But his writings, the writings that you can find on Zero Carb Zen, come from the time when he became active on Reddit in their forum. I believe it was Reddit, or it might have just been a low-carb forum before Reddit even existed. And people were so impressed by his messages that they saved them. So I would highly recommend looking at them. They also contain interesting recipes. interesting. And now he knew the science of carnivore backwards and forwards. As I like to say on this channel, I'm not really about the science. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a spiritual leader. So I want to do 80% inspiration and the mental health benefits of carnivore, which I think are extraordinary, and 20% science, 80-20, so that we can understand, or at least begin the process of understanding why it works. But the bear had both. He had the science knowledge and he had the mental health knowledge. He doesn't really get much into the spirituality of it. But I think that's important because we all come from different faith traditions. I know I have many strong Christians and Jews who watch this channel. And I know that this is something that resonates. The sense of peace of mind, the sense of calm, the sense of perspective, the sense of connection to nature and a higher power, that comes through carnivore. When we nourish our bodies, we nourish our spirits as well. It's all connected. It's, again, sometimes you might have to experience this to realize it. I happen to think one of the reasons religion has declined so much in the modern world is our nutrition. Our nutrition contributes to our declining attention span, which makes praying and focusing harder and harder. So when we get back to nourishing our bodies in the right way, we get back to that place where we can connect with what's bigger, what's more important than each of us, that larger, higher power, that deeper sense of community, that spiritual connection that we have with other people and with God. And I hope that some of that can come through this channel. And I hope that you can get some of that by looking at what the bear has written. And in many ways, religion and faith is countercultural in our world today. Our world doesn't encourage people to be too active in their religion. Look, the statistics bear this out. 2022 was the first time in America that less than 50% of the U.S. population went to a house of worship on a monthly basis. First time since any survey has been taken. So, to get back to carnivore, one of the reasons I embrace this way of life, and I want to encourage others to explore it, is because it can nourish our souls and our bodies and can restore that connection to what matters most. It can bring us shalom for the body, shalom for the mind, and shalom for the soul. See all of you next time.